For now, I would like to introduce our second panelist, Dr. Miriam MAINA, to talk about sustainable development in African towns and cities. Dr. MAINA is an urban researcher, GIS, and data analytics consultant. She holds a master's and a doctorate in town and regional planning from the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa and a BA in urban and regional planning from the University of Nairobi in Kenya. In her work, Dr. MAINA uses social and geospatial data, analytics, illustration, and storytelling to analyze the social and economic development of African towns and cities. Dr. MAINA, greatly appreciate you being here with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me confirm that my sound is okay. Can you hear me?
You sound wonderful.
Okay, give me a minute to start my slideshow. Just give me a second. But it's such an honor to be here and actually to present just after Dr. Olwene, because some of the thoughts and stuff that I wanted to share with us today are already covered. So I feel very confident to just move on to the next slide. But as you heard, my name is Miriam and I'm a town planner by profession and a postdoctoral researcher at the NRF chair in spatial analysis and city planning in the School of Architecture and Planning at WITS. But I'm originally from Nairobi, Kenya. And so it's a great honor to be here and to listen to some of the concerns across the continent that we are all experiencing. So my presentation today will pick up actually from where Dr. Olwene has presented, and I will try to zoom out a bit more to some of these issues that you already know relating to Africa's urbanization that is being projected to drive most of the world's urbanization. And then to pick up some of the opportunities we may have around coordinating action at the local government level. The rapid technological change that is happening today has really affected all sectors and will continue to transform how we live in and operate and manage cities, and how city governments can engage with and collaborate with all residents and stakeholders. So my presentation will be calling for a more innovative look at how we understand and use data and information to inform decision-making, to deepen partnerships and collaboration, and to create more effective and equitable towns and cities. So as we have heard, and as we can see from the data and statistics, Africa's future is urban. Data and statistics tell us that the African continent in general and the region will drive most of the world's urbanization in the next few decades. And this is important, I think, for a few reasons. Number one, the pace itself is unprecedented. So not only is Africa's population going to increase, but the number of agglomerations will go up. And the growth itself is being driven by small and medium-sized cities. And as you heard from the previous presentation, these are some of the towns which normally do not have either the capacity or the resources to coordinate equitable or sustainable growth. At the same time, as we saw from the previous maps, it will also take the form of urban agglomerations in regions which require really coordinated action, not just across different counties or different towns within the same country, but in some of the bigger sub-regions, it actually requires coordination across different countries. So a regional level of coordination and planning and actually investment. And last but not least, the bulk of the investment and development is actually done by residents and individuals in what experts are referring to as popular urbanism, sometimes undertaken with the support of built environment professionals, sometimes not. And it's done plot by plot, incrementally and over time. So households are the ones that are driving most of the development of cities. And we really need to consider that. So these facts need to be obviously contextualized against well-known realities, such as the need to respond to issues of climate change, to steward the production of more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive spaces, and to ensure that we strengthen our ability to respond to unexpected crises, such as the devastating global pandemic. And traditionally, Africa's urban future is viewed through this lens of catastrophe, and we can all list all the challenges we have at the national, at the regional, and the local government level. And in our social, political, and economic realities that continue to stifle our ability to achieve this equitable future. And these are not light concerns, we should really look into them. But today I would like to highlight a few provocations under this theme of innovation that are pointing towards a more proactive and collaborative approach to responding to the challenges. So the first point I wanted to raise is how do we think about informality? The COVID pandemic reminded us of how interrelated our cities are and of the fact that our personal, our physical, and our psychological health and well-being will be affected by the social, economic, and spatial form of the cities we live in. When we were put under, for example, mandatory lockdown in some of the cities, and residents were forced to stay home and implement social distancing and meet certain health and safety regulations, it quickly became apparent that the poorest residents of most of our cities were once again pushed to higher vulnerabilities without access to adequate space for social distancing, basic services, reliable public transport, food shortages as supply chains were compromised, and reduced incomes and economic vulnerability since most of us could not work at home. So in considering innovation, then I wanted to start with this well-worn idea, like how do we think about the informal, or the unregulated, or the unplanned? Labeling areas as informal or illegal or unregulated does not negate their presence. Instead, these labels create gray areas that remain outside the official consciousness of the state, and therefore outside the investment priorities of administrations. And if most of our neighborhoods and towns are being built by residents and households incrementally through organic processes that may or may not fall outside what the state considers to be formal, how can we begin to coordinate a more harmonized approach to development? How are we adjusting our laws and our regulations to make sure that services, infrastructure, and critical amenities are available for all residents? My second provocation is that local government is key. When we talk of city building, our minds naturally drift to town planners and architects and engineers. But today I would like to push past this functional separation of roles and responsibilities and actually argue that the mandate of local government as a whole is to create and maintain a spatial, social, and economic environment that we're going to live in. And in their duty to, it is a duty to work with stakeholders through democratic processes or something to ensure that we are collectively building effective towns and cities. Local governments are the stewards of what urban future we will experience. They formulate the strategic plans, they articulate the long-term trajectory for development, they propose how we can achieve more sustainable futures. They raise revenue to provide critical services such as electricity, water, sewerage, sanitation, stormwater, refuse removal, firefighting, municipal health. They build roads and facilities for public transport, markets, parks, recreation, and all community facilities. They determine the zoning and development control guidelines and approve what developers and households can and cannot build, where, when, and how. So my second provocation is even more ambitious. If we want to have better, more productive, more inclusive, and more effective cities, then this mandate has to be met at the local government level. And if we want to untangle and address some of these challenges that we're talking about that are making our cities and towns not the most ideal spaces, then we need to solve the issues of capacity and resources and coordination and harmonization at the local level. Otherwise, we will continue to reproduce exactly what we say we don't want to have. And my argument is we need to develop then systems of coordination, not just within, for example, the built environment practitioners or private and public sector, but actually across local government departments, all the urban actors and decision makers, private sector architects and planners and developers, financiers, individual households, if we're ever going to produce sort of effective urban spaces. And today I want to highlight on the role of data as a strategic asset to sort of support this process. Let's quickly pivot to some of these exciting changes that are occurring with data in the fourth industrial revolution. So the 4IR is really broad and exciting, and I won't be covering a lot of it today, but I would like to highlight the fact that the 4IR is a broadest ecosystem that pulls together accelerated change and transformation in technology, in production, in computing, and the rise in networks and information and collaboration, but also due to the technological breakthroughs in AI and robotics and Internet of Things, automation, biotech, and quantum computing. And alongside this, then the rise of large-scale information and big data. So sometimes when we pivot to data, it seems like data is the only reason why we need to be excited about the 4IR, but actually it's not. We need to look at the process of digitization and how digitization is allowing us to work with technology to make better decisions. But let's come back to data for today. Data, when converted to information and insight, is really the driving force between some of these changes we're seeing in the economic, social, political shifts and driving most of the innovation across society. The global coordination and tracking in response to the global pandemic that I just pointed to, for example, provides a useful example of how data and information, but also other mechanisms were pulled together across different sectors to inform and shape a global response. So data only becomes valuable once it's processed and converted into information and knowledge and action, and that speaks to capacity. So if we look at local government, one of the quick arguments we make is urban data was always there. In their day-to-day work, local governments collect a lot of information. If you go to the licensing department to get a permit to open a shop, someone captures that activity. The planning department has records of who, where, and how development is happening across the city. Trading, water, public transport, all these departments have data and information that they use to manage their portfolios, to inform their decisions and actually decide where they want to invest. Traditionally, this data was in paper form, but with shifts in digitization and some of these developments that we're seeing, this has changed. And in the past and today, however, unfortunately, most of these databases are still collected, maintained, and utilized within these closed departmental systems, which are the backdrop of the silo mode of operation that drives some of the action in public sector. And while some of the departments use the information for strategic policies, decisions, and investment, most departments actually might not use this information once they're collected. So can we begin to imagine a future where all this information in departmental databases can be pulled into an urban data ecosystem that functions as a commonly accessible asset that can be used by multiple actors to inform policy, strategic planning, and investment? This is a tall order indeed, but I think it's a necessary shift. And my suggestion here is if corporations can leverage data, so private sector, for example, to improve customer experiences, to open new markets, to increase efficiency and productivity, and to create new sources of competitive advantage, why can't we aspire to do this at local government level? And a quick disclaimer here about the issue of data and governance and power. So there are very many concerns when it comes to data, human rights, and the potential for misuse, especially within political frameworks where power relations are not balanced. It would really be naive to adopt a technocratic assumption that data does not carry a potential for bias or have implications on power or politics. Data is political. However, like any other tool, the use or misuse of data is not a flaw in the data itself, but in what the practitioners are allowed to do or not do with the data. So one of the suggestions I wanted to put on the discussion today is that using the data can be used for political purposes, but choosing to not use data is also a political act. And if we don't rely on evidence-based decision-making, processes of planning, political and administrative action, then we will still have political decisions and administrative actions, but they will be taken based on other forms of rationalization or sentiment that are not necessarily democratic or that cannot be clearly discussed by all the actors. So the push to lean towards more evidence-based approaches is actually to say we can use data to support the political administrative decision processes at the local government level. And a more productive exercise then is to create the rules that relate to data governance and to formulate data protection laws and regulations that can work towards the right-based sharing environment. However, I'm really aware that from the research on the continent, some of Africa's leading economies still lack laws that clearly safeguard the data privacy rights of residents. We have to put these safeguards in place. And the timeline that I wanted to share with us here today is from the City of New York's Open Data Platform, which we really admire in the end goal to see what they've been able to achieve by being able to open up all their municipal data for a big community to begin to work with. But what we see today is a robust open data ecosystem that has really enhanced the functioning of the administration itself, but also empowered the community, tech and app developers, mobility companies, taxi companies, but also real estate and resident sectors. What we don't see is how long this process took to be achieved. As we can see, the vision itself goes as far back as the 1970s and has been incrementally implemented from department to department, all the way to the Department of IT that was created in 2001. And so when we see today an open data portal for the New York City, we need to understand the back process that has led them there. So my point here is the process is long and is complex and deeply political, but it is not impossible. So to conclude, I will just go through my points again. The first one is that Africa's future is urban. Our towns, cities, and metropolitan regions will be critical in shaping what kind of future we will have on the continent. Local actors, especially municipal administrations, will be critical in determining what kinds of cities and towns we will build and live in. There is an opportunity to leverage the already existing urban data ecosystem to support evidence-driven planning, investment, and collaboration towards a more equitable future. This, however, requires a systemic shift in governance, in the technical capacity of actors, not just within the local government, but in actually the private sector that invests in the cities, but also in the households and residents that operate in the city. We need to shift to a culture of collaboration, cooperation, and knowledge exchange, and build some of these measures of accountability. And we are, however, aware of the capacity and resources challenges that exist within local government and administrations, especially within these secondary towns and cities that will be growing very rapidly. Without financial resources, technological, and administrative capacity, local governments may continue to struggle to steward the development in a more productive direction. My argument, or my point here is, if we look to the broader ecosystem of urban players, as Dr. Olweni was showing, once you expand the view to not just the local government actors, or start looking at other different practitioners that are operating within the same field, what we call built environment or city building, then we find the capacity is there. If you go to the universities and technical colleges and the NGOs and special interest groups, so the private sector corporations, there's a lot of technical and technological capacity. So using the data example, if we can invest in a collaborative urban data ecosystem that is well regulated and managed, but also easily accessible, and then if we invest in spaces of innovation and partnership with other actors and institutions, so for example, urban labs, then even an under-resourced local government can really benefit from all the other players' expertise to help it achieve its mandates. And this is not a utopian idea. Many of the revolutionary changes we're seeing in the 4IR could not have been achieved without corporations working with the research and the university communities through innovation hubs, innovation labs, and learning networks. Silicon Valley is the best example of this. Can we borrow this model to solve the seemingly intractable problems of African urbanization? Such approaches would need to be embedded in a political and administrative culture that really embraces data and information sharing, collaboration, knowledge exchange, and inclusion, but within a properly governed and regulated ecosystem. But they would open up a more proactive, democratic, and collaborative pathway towards problem solving, innovation, and experimentation, and hopefully drive a more equitable urban future on our continent. As part of this network of change makers, I'm really excited, and I'd really love to know and connect and learn more about what is happening across the different towns and cities represented here today, especially if there's university-city collaborations or experimental labs and hubs that are happening across the cities that are here today. It would really be wonderful to learn about that. But thank you very much for your time.